Good afternoon, evening thing, people. So I'm going to do another classical. Yeah, I know it looks upside down over there. Don't pay attention. So this is a classical photon, basically. This is a photon. This is a classical model of a photon, which to me actually explains or can explain entanglement of, quote, photons, because it's very different to have a photon as a process than a photon as a sort of like a ray-ish particle in terms of their functionality. So here we have, let's pretend this is an atom, right? There's a proton, there's a first orbital, there's a second orbital. We're going to pretend like the electron's in the second orbital, and then drops down to this orbital. Very literal, right? It drops an energy level. These are more than metaphorical because they have physical effects. So it drops down an energy level and emits a photon, right? These things happen in conjunction, and I say it's like they're sort of the same thing. If we take it from a classical approach, we're just going to say that space is a fluid. The electron, which is an outward pressure, a divergent pressure in my model. Electrons are divergent, protons are convergent, and that's why it's surrounded, because that way this will all flow into here. Okay, so the electron drops down to here. That creates like a lamination of the space, because all this fluid space dropped from here to here. But that creates a shortage of stuff here because it just dropped down to here. So that means that this space out here has to flow in to compensate. But that means that this space out here has to flow in to compensate. And this is how we get the photon as essentially an implosion shock wave, as created by the collapse of the electron orbital. Electron orbital shrinks, creates like a radial lamination inward, but that causes a radial lamination inward, which causes a radial lamination inward, etc., etc., etc. And this entire thing is the photon. That entire sphere surface is a photon. And I will actually, I call on quantum field theory in that the total probability, because we don't know where a photon is going to go. We just know where we ended up measuring it. But we don't know where a photon is going to go until we guide it. We force it into a bunch of constraints to channel all of this down a tube or something. Or we just put a detector over here, let's say, and we can catch that part when it gets over here. And you'll say, oh yeah, but you can only detect there's only one. Why is there only one? Well, this is a process. This is an integrated process in a superfluid. This is like an expanding membrane process. And if you break any part of that process, the entire thing will collapse at the speed of light along that gradients, along that surface. If you look up, I'll try and look for a video, but if you look at these bubbles, these toroidal bubbles you can make with air underwater that behave very much like strings, like superfluid strings, that the process is as they interact. If you create a bubble toroid, if you break the bubble toroid, you've caused a cut in the flow. And as soon as that happens, the entire thing just like falls apart. There's a structural integrity to them. And we are literally collapsing the wave function. This is a classical view of it. And that's simply the implosion shock wave. In quantum field theory, the entire probability sphere of the photon, the entire probability sphere, not just the detection, but before, after it was just created, the probability sphere for the photon, I say, is the entire process of the photon. It is a implosion shock wave expanding at c from the source atom, generally. And that's your typical photon. You know? And in fact, this way it's expanding here, contracting here. It's like a full process, like a toroidal process, expanding at c from the origin. And this is the classical explanation for photons. And in such, that means that any polarization that happens here is happening everywhere. Anything that you do over here gets effects everywhere, and that's quantum entanglement of photons, is that this entire thing is a singular membrane. So anything you do over here gets transmitted over there. It's like adding charge to a metal sphere. If you have a metal sphere and you add a charge, just one charge, one electron somehow, it's a thought experiment. Where is that charge? That charge is now distributed. And it doesn't matter where you touch, you'll ground it out. You don't have to touch where the electron is, because the electron is everywhere. You just have to touch and you'll ground it out. And so, similarly with this, you break it anywhere and you've broken the whole thing. But you could detect it anywhere on the probability sphere that is the photon. Anyways, that's a classical version.